Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sue Hutchins, and welcome to the next session in Iowa Prison Perspectives. If you choose to get in touch with us, we can be located at Iowa Prison Perspectives at gmail.com. That's IA Prison Perspectives at gmail.com. The purpose of these series is to inform you, the public, about the workings of the correctional facilities in Iowa, the way the criminal justice system operates, and to give you that information through the eyes of people who've been incarcerated, of people who love someone who's incarcerated, of people who work or have worked with in the prison system and the juvenile justice system, and also with activists, people who don't have someone, a loved one in prison, but they have a keen interest in the prison system and the way prisons work, specifically in Iowa, but all over the country, in fact, all over the world. The organization that we're going to hear from today is one of the organizations that is a co-sponsor of this series. It's the Iowa Justice Action Network, and we're privileged to have Dr. Alan Hayes, who is the co-founder of this organization and has been instrumental in offering opportunities and conferences for people to understand the way mass incarceration works, to understand the way legislation works, and to support to a small degree, some degree, legislation that we feel as an organization, a nonprofit organization, um, legislation that we see as would be helpful. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Al, which is what I call him, Dr. Hayes, and let him talk to you about mass incarceration and about the Iowa Justice Action Network and about his personal experience in this journey. So thank you very much for being here, Al. We really appreciate it.
I'm glad to do it. Um, well, as she mentioned, I'm a retired UNI professor. I taught for 34 years in political science and public policy. Um, I really got interested in mass incarceration about 10 or 11 years ago, as partly as a result of being in a workshop called Undoing Racism, where we talked about ways to um, uh, respond to the huge problem of racism that exists in our society. And uh, we originally started with a local group here in Blackhawk County that was primarily concerned about the unfairness and the irrationality of the war on drugs. But we quickly realized that there were more issues in mass incarceration than just the war on drugs, although that's a major contributor to mass incarceration. Um, and so we decided, and also we decided that if we were going to have any uh, influence on decision making at the state level, we needed to have a broader coalition than just people here in Blackhawk County, where I live. Um, so we put together the Iowa Justice Action Network, and we've now been in existence since about 2014, so 10 years now. I think, when you talk about mass incarceration, uh, most people are familiar with the statistic that the United States has the highest per capita rate of incarceration of any country in the world, and that this incarceration falls very disproportionately on people of color. Probably some of you have read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, which really laid out the racial injustice of it. But of course, it's an unjust system that affects people of all races, just disproportionately people of color. IJAN has had from its beginning the purpose of legislative advocacy, getting before the state legislature, which is the main decision-making body for criminal justice legislation in Iowa. It has not been frankly, a very receptive audience in the past 6 or 7 years, um, despite this uh, mass incarceration reform being a bipartisan issue in many states. In our state, the mostly Republican leadership of the Iowa legislature has not been very responsive to any efforts to reform mass incarceration, which can lead to a degree of frustration, but you have to be a voice, you have to keep trying, and hopefully at some point people will begin to listen. Um, there are many dimensions to mass incarceration. There's a whole set of issues related to what I call the front door of mass incarceration. How do people get involved to start out with? Um, this involves, of course, the police, and we've seen much evidence of racial bias in policing. We tried to get a, a, a bill to address um, disproportionate arrests of people of color a few years ago. That didn't go anywhere. Um, and and then, of course, sometimes people, in focusing on the police, don't realize what a huge amount of discretion prosecutors have, because the police can arrest somebody for a crime and charge them with something, but then it's really the prosecutor who decides ultimately what to charge them for whatever offense they may have committed. And then since uh, uh, you know we've been riveted by the drama of former President Trump before having a jury trial, but we shouldn't forget that 90% of cases are never go to a jury. They're decided by plea bargain. And that gives the prosecutor a lot of discretion in what bargain will be offered and and of course what the person will accept. Um, Another aspect of the front door is financial. Uh, mo Most people in jail are not there because they've actually been convicted of a crime, but because they have been unable to make bail, or in some cases because they've been remanded back to jail because of probation or parole violations, and they're sitting there waiting the determination of whether they will actually go back to prison or not. Um, so, uh, and bail, of course, is very discriminatory against uh, uh, poor people in general. And it's really, you're in jail because you can't afford whatever. And typically people can't come up with a whole bail amount, so they have to pay 10% to a bail bondsman and which they will never see again, regardless of what the disposition of their case is. There are also fees charged for the time you spend in jail. That varies somewhat by county. Blackhawk happens to charge pretty large fees for uh, staying in jail. That um, form a can be a very substantial and often insurmountable financial barrier to people that are enmeshed in the system. Recently, the one of our partners, the Iowa League of Women Voters, has taken a position on financial reform in the system, which we hope will be listened to, since this is a very respected group in the state. Um, of course, juvenile involvement is another front door. People that get involved early in the juvenile system may end up getting more involved as adults. Um, the Fortunately, one positive trend has been the reduction in the number of juveniles being incarcerated. there's a 70% reduction nationally in the number of juveniles being incarcerated, and a pretty substantial reduction in Iowa in juveniles being incarcerated. And really, incarcerating a juvenile really doesn't do anyone any good. Very few juveniles are actually active threats to public safety when they're arrested, and so um, it makes little sense to incarcerate them, and of course that disrupts their life, their family life, and so can contribute to further delinquency or even adult. Of course, a few are remanded to adult court, which we think is not justified in the vast majority of cases. There's really no justification for remanding a juvenile to adult court. Um, so that's another problem. Um, Nationally, the rate of mass incarceration has gone down, which is a good news. It reached a peak of about 2.3 million in about 2010. Since then, the national rate has gone down to 1.9 million, still way too high, but at least it's in the right direction. And this is a result of a lot of very serious reform efforts that have been made in many states. But unfortunately, Iowa is not one of those states. Iowa prison population is roughly the same as it was about 10 years ago. Um,
And if I could just add to that, every prison except for the women's prison is overcrowded.
right,
Even
our
though our
prisons,
governor, yeah, even though
our,
our governor states that that we are releasing more and more people, we seem to be filling it up just as fast as we release. So,
right, the official capacity of uh, the Iowa prisons is around, I think, 7,200 or 7,300, and yet we have about 8,300 that are incarcerated. Prisons are definitely overcrowded, have been for years, and really, uh, really nothing's been done about it, um, or very little has been done about it. Um, I should mention, in terms of the disproportionality at the front door, um, I recently had some students compile some data from the the Iowa Department of Human Rights, which through its Criminal and Juvenile Justice Planning Agency collects masses of data on who's arrested, who gets convicted, and they looked at the 8 urban counties in Iowa, Lynn, Blackhawk, um, Potawatomi, um, Scott, and so forth, and every single one of them there was a disproportionality, substantial disproportionality in felony convictions uh, between the races, and this, of course, results in a huge disproportionality of people in prison that are black, um, and um, so it's even though we often think of Blackhawk County as having one of the worst disproportionalities, which it does. It's not alone among um, uh, urban counties and having this. And the same is true for misdemeanors. And sometimes people think of a misdemeanor, well, that's not a very serious offense, but there's all kinds of misdemeanors, everything from, spitting on the sidewalk to being being busted for possession of marijuana, and just simple possession is a misdemeanor. And so getting involved at the misdemeanor level can sometimes lead to more entanglement and greater involvement that leads to more serious charges. So IJAN has we understand that there are many things, many factors that may lead to someone getting involved in the system. We understand that poverty is a big contributor. race is a big contributor. Um, the uh, ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, uh, one of which is having a parent in prison, by the way. One of the ACEs is having a parent in prison, and that all those factors can contribute to someone getting involved. Of course, drug and alcohol abuse, mental illness, all those are often precursors of involvement. But IJAN has really chosen to focus on the system itself and how it treats people. And because you start getting into those causes and you're in, you know, huge uh, complicated areas all their own. We want to talk about disproportionality in the education system. That's rampant, and often, with school resource officers, the black kids that get arrested or get suspended at higher levels than the white kids, and so there are lots of contributing factors, and we're always cognizant of that, and we have taken positions about the contribution of mental illness, but we try to look at the functioning of the system itself. That's kind of keeps our focus somewhat. It's not really narrow because there's many different things that need to be changed. Um, we need to look at um, uh, how cases are being handled at the local level, and of course that can be an object of local pressure. You don't necessarily have to have legislative changes to get prosecutors to change their behavior. Uh, County attorney or prosecutor is an elected office, and yet, and the voters have an opportunity to weigh in on the philosophy of the prosecutor. And yet, most of those races are uncontested. It's rare to see a contested race for a county attorney in Iowa. And so the voters obviously aren't aware of how much power that position has. Or now, of course, nationally, there have been some what we call progressive prosecutors that have come in and tried to change things. Um, of course, opponents have, as they always do, used fear of crime as a cudgel to beat down any kind of reform. But in fact, and there was a spike in crime rates in many large cities as related to the pandemic in 20 and 21, 2020 and 21. But the evidence that that's somehow related to bail reform or to the policies of progressive prosecutors is not there. It just doesn't exist. It's just something that people say as a matter of political rhetoric. Also, um, um, well, anyway, so the notion that the crime wave is oh yeah, I know the other thing is, of course, around the time of George Floyd, there was talk of defunding the police, which became a big scare headline for many people. Well, if you look around the country and try to find how many police departments were actually defunded, it's close to zero where they actually lost funding. Um, and and there's no correlation between any police departments whose funding was cut and the crime rate. The crime rate is the same or higher in cities where the police have not been defunded as it is in those very few where maybe police resources were cut back. So the notion that somehow, defunding the police is causing the crime rate is just baloney. I'm sorry, it's not true.
Right.
And it's just a bit of political rhetoric that people still want to beat the horse of, our cities are out of control. And of course, violence in urban areas is a real problem. We don't want to dismiss it. And there are various mechanisms that can be used, interventions that can be used to reduce urban violence. Uh, and there are programs all over the country that are based on interventions to try to prevent situations from escalating to where the result is violence. And, like everything else, they're mixed success, but a lot of them really do work. And and so that's what we need to look at. And of course, if the community doesn't trust the police, then it's very hard for the police to get the community to cooperate in actually reducing crime when um, uh, if they don't trust the police to begin with. And of course, the constant harassment of community members for various kinds of minor offenses, driving while black, as they call it, all that does is create more distrust between the community and the police. And it makes it more difficult to solve, more serious crimes. The clearance rate for murder in the United States is about 50%, and most murderers get away with it. And yet, and those more serious crimes are hard to clear when the community is not in a mood to cooperate with the police. So I think one thing that IJAN has to do is get out the message that the scare rhetoric about crime, increasing crime, and trying to link that to reform is has no basis. IJAN's, we have worked on legislative advocacy, but we also work on education. And every year we've sponsored a major conference on some aspect of the system. Last year, in October, we did a great conference on the juvenile system. Had some really good speakers and learned about that. The year before that, we had a conference with the Sentencing Project where we sort of commemorated what they consider to be the 50th anniversary of mass incarceration, because they believe it really started with the policies of President Richard Nixon in 1973. And then we've had others on the cradle to prison pipeline. We've had them on just a variety of issues. One of the things we've tried to work on is sentencing. Sue has been very involved in the issue of life without parole. Historically, life without parole did not always mean that, because governors were very willing to commute life sentences. And in recent years, though, as commutations have gone down drastically on a national level, it's become to mean you will die in prison. And so there's very great need of reform and I believe, Sue, there are 600 or 700 people serving life without parole in Iowa right now, if my numbers are right.
700 plus. It's closer to 790.
Okay, so it's a lot closer to 800. I'm low. 700 people that literally, and the governor talked early in her term about trying to reform the process so people could go up for review and she could review it for commutation, and she put the review process in place, but so far she's simply not listened to it and has not commuted anyone's life sentence. Eliminating life without parole for accomplices is something we feel should be done. Having compassionate release. If you've got a person that's 70 years old sitting in prison that committed the crime 30 plus years ago and is sick and is costing the state money, extra money other than the $35,000 a year basic cost for imprisonment, costing them extra money for health care, there's a very good argument for compassionate release because the probability of them committing another crime is extremely low. On sentencing, we believe sentencing generally, the sentences that are imposed in Iowa and elsewhere are simply too long. Um, there's beyond a certain point, there's plenty of research that shows that adding years to a sentence does not decrease, uh, it does not increase the deterrence of the sentence. In fact, it may actually contribute to recidivism because if you've been in prison for a long time and you're trying to adjust to being a life outside, it's very, very difficult. You've spent 15 or 17 years of your life in prison, and all of a sudden you have to come back into society. It's very, very difficult. So there's really no justification for the length of sentencing that exists in Iowa and elsewhere. And certainly European countries have similar or lower crime rates than we do, with much lower sentences for almost uh, every crime you can name. Um, Mandatory minimums, which were uh, introduced in the so-called truth in sentencing uh, movement of the 80s and 90s, where if you're sentenced to 10 years, the public tends to believe you'll spend 10 years in prison. But that, until truth in sentencing came in, often people were let out on parole earlier and didn't serve their 10 years. And the idea was for serious crimes, you should make them stay in prison at least for a certain percentage of their sentence before they could even be considered for parole. That's what we call mandatory minimums. And that means if you're convicted of armed robbery, that's a 25-year sentence. So you're in prison for 17 years before you can even be considered for parole. And we think that takes a lot of the flexibility out of the system. There are good reasons to grant parole to people, and so um, we feel like that most mandatory minimums are um, are not necessary. And of course, the two things that contribute to the prison population are who is sent to prison and how long they stay. And so, reducing the length of sentences would be a good way to reduce the overall prison population without any real threat to public safety. So, I mean, there are, many more reforms that we could talk about that would really improve the system. Um, but we need to keep working on that in Iowa to try to get some decision makers to listen to the good arguments as to why um, uh, some of these reforms need to be made. Of course, when people get out of prison, then that's another whole set of issues. That's sort of the back door, if you want, the end of the time when most landlords won't rent to someone that has a felony conviction. Just across the board, they won't do it. So somebody coming out of prison has a very difficult time getting adequate housing. Um, a lot of employers still won't hire people with felony convictions. Some will, and most that do hire people with felony convictions find that in the vast majority of cases there's no reoffending, um, and so um, it's at least not that affects their work, um, and so um, it's the employment discrimination, the housing discrimination. Um, and I'm sure some of the Sue and some of the others can really talk about the effect that it has on families. Obviously, a family member going to prison, disrupts your family system, and that means that, and trying to keep that person in contact and positive contact with their family has been shown by research to really help reduce their recidivism, both the contact that they have with their family during the time they're in prison and the ability to reintegrate with their family when they get out. And so, uh, and of course, uh, Sue's organization, Living Beyond the Bars, has been really working hard with the families themselves to help deal with the stress that they uh, um, encounter as a result of their family member being incarcerated. So we have to work on things at that end as well as, as the front end. We have to work on, you know, how they get arrested, how they're charged, what their sentence is, how much of their sentence they have to serve, the parole system, probation system, uh, you know, the the 82 we talk about the 8,200 and something that are in actually in state prisons, and we sometimes uh, uh, don't emphasize that another over 40,000 more people in Iowa are under correctional control, which means they're on probation or on parole. And of course, probation is good in that it keeps people in the community, but the probation system also needs a lot of work on it. We could get into some of the things that need to be done there. And so uh, we we have to realize that the system is not just the people that are sitting in Anamosa or Clarinda or wherever. It's also the people that are out in the community, but under correctional supervision.
And their
Well,
families.
and their families, right?
And their families.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think I can quit there and see if you have additional questions, Sue.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Al, for sharing that information and for sharing what IJAN is involved in and what our focus is. Let me just say that IJAN is not an organization that believes that everybody should just get out of prison. We are
Right,
not saying
right.
that people don't deserve consequences. We are not saying that there aren't people that everybody should just get out, that everybody's safe. There are people who belong in prison.
Mhm.
There are people who are a danger to society and need to not be among us. What we are saying is that we believe that everybody deserves the opportunity to be looked at individually and the opportunity to have some rehabilitation and to have treatment and to have their mental health issues addressed and to have their substance use issues addressed and to be treated humanely and to have an opportunity to rehabilitate. And then, if they are no longer a danger, the opportunity to be out of prison. And we believe that that goes across the board, regardless of the crime, regardless of your color of skin, regardless of your nationality, regardless of your gender, regardless of anything, that every human being deserves that. So I just always like to make sure that nobody who's listening in the public thinks that we just think we ought to just open the doors and let everybody out, because we do not think that. I don't
We,
think anybody
we
in their right mind thinks that.
we define mass incarceration as the incarceration of people beyond what's necessary for public safety,
Exactly.
recognizing that there's a certain number of people that need to be incarcerated,
Right.
and I mean that need to face consequences
Right.
for uh, actions that seriously harm other people, either physically or their property, either physical harm to their bodies or their property. We don't want a guy to be able to inflict violence on another family member and get by with it and not be in some way held accountable for that. Uh, we don't want people to steal other people's property without some accountability for that.
Mhm.
But the challenge to respect human dignity applies even to the worst of us in society. I think all people have inherent worth and dignity, and that means that when you do decide to punish somebody for a crime, you've got to realize that they still have a certain inherent worth as a human being, and You know, there are prison systems that in other countries that, you know, people in this country would denounce as country club prisons where they have all kinds of privileges and they're actually treated more like human beings. And the surprising thing is those countries have lower recidivism rates than we do. So just because prison is a more comfortable and humane environment doesn't mean that uh, people want to go to prison or say, oh, well, prison's not so bad. I don't mind going there. That's not true. Uh, and so we can have a lot more humanity in the way that we uh, treat people that are incarcerated without necessarily um, leading to people, you know, people more likely to commit crimes. So,
Agreed, totally agree, totally agree. Which is why I'm part of IJAN. It's because I totally
right.
agree. We're people of like-minded values. I don't know how comfortable you are, Al, but if you are at all comfortable talking about your own personal frustration and your own personal journey in starting and co-chairing and working in the Iowa Justice Action Network, I want you to have time to talk about that if it's something that you're
Sure.
comfortable.
Well, when in my academic career, I didn't really specialize in criminal justice that much. Um, and, um, you know, I'm not a criminologist. Didn't train personally, professionally as a criminologist. Uh, but I think it all started with thinking about this huge problem of racism we have in society and how can we deal with that. And obviously, racism affects many institutions and in many ways, from educational to jobs to housing to the whole gamut of um, situations and associations and decisions that are affected in some way by racial discrimination and disparities and so forth. But it seemed to me that a criminal conviction is simply an anvil around someone's ankle. It's like you're tying an anvil to their ankle and making it much more difficult to function in society. And when you disproportionately tie that anvil around the ankles of a particular group in society, namely people of color, then that holds back every other attempt that you make to address all the other problems that they face. Because once you have a criminal conviction, it's perfectly legal to discriminate against you. It's not legal to discriminate against you on the basis of race, although that still happens. It's not legal to discriminate against you on the basis of gender, but it is legal to discriminate against you based on um, a criminal conviction. So, and as I said before, my involvement really got started with looking at the gross inequities in the war on drugs, the fact that black people and white people use drugs at roughly the same rates, but black people are many times more likely to get arrested for drug use than white people. And so obviously it's not the drug use that's the problem. It's that certain groups are being singled out uh, when they do use or sell drugs for disproportionate punishment. So um, you know, we used to say in our presentations in that group, the war on drugs is a war on people of color. Uh, and in spite of all the money spent on the war on drugs, it has not reduced addiction rates. Addiction rates have stayed about roughly constant over the whole years that we spent billions on prosecuting and incarcerating um, people for selling and using drugs. So it's obviously not really solving the problem of addiction, which we all recognize as a serious problem. Um, it's not the solution that we need to, if we really wanted to reduce that problem in society. There are many other strategies that are much better. And certainly it's unconscionable that we are singling out particular groups in our society for the whole drug enforcement effort. That's just unconscionable. And so uh, now we have uh, gradually we're starting to disengage the war on drugs from marijuana, which is good, I think. And and the legalization movement has really taken hold in this country in a way that, frankly, uh, if I would have been really surprised back in 2010 when I first started this to realize how much uh, uh, the legalization of that particular drug has taken hold, uh, and and so, um, but still, people are getting busted for marijuana possession. Don't forget that they're still getting busted, and it's black kids that are getting busted for marijuana possession. Okay, it's largely black kids that are getting busted for it. Okay, that's just a fact. And so we still need to look at that, even as we gradually disengage from marijuana prohibition. We still need to make sure that people are of color are not being singled out for what enforcement remains. Now, of course, we've had new drugs come on, um, opioids and fentanyl and stuff, which are serious problems, and we need to figure out how to deal with them. But again, long prison sentences for those drugs really don't make much sense either, even as serious as they are, much more serious than marijuana. So my involvement really stemmed out of my commitment to racial justice. And, over the past 10 years, I've really learned a lot about this. And I've gotten to be um, someone that I think is, you know, pretty knowledgeable and committed to trying to perform. But of course, it's very frustrating when you feel like people in the decision-making roles are just, I mean, they are so locked into this punishment orientation. Those are bad people and they need to be punished, that they really can't see past that kind of mindset to understand that punishment has consequences. You need punishment, sure you do, but the punishment itself has consequences and doesn't necessarily, in the long run, really address the problem. And so uh, it's as frustrating to me that people just won't listen. Also, that they're going to continue to try to make political hay out of fear of crime, which, you know, obviously people have a right to be worried about criminal behavior that affects them. There's no doubt about that. But the way in which fear of crime is used politically as a weapon to try to get people elected, I think again is really unconscionable. It just is the worst kind of political pandering, and and we're going to see that again this year in our election. We're going to
Mhm.
see, you know, uh, more lock them up and efforts to attack the reform efforts that have been made, try to roll back some of the reform efforts that have been made. So it's frustrating, but again, personally, I feel like I need to keep advocating on this issue. It's kind of my responsibility to keep working on it.
Thank you very much. I agree with that. What goes through my mind as you're talking, as you've been talking the whole time, is two wrongs don't make a right. They just never have. And oftentimes, the sentences are just as traumatizing to society as the crimes. Another thing that it seems to me that we do in this culture is we go after the sensational crimes, and those get larger sentences and a lot more press. It also seems to me that we have a tendency to keep victims in a victim position, and that does not help forgiveness, does not help healing, does not help, period. So, once again, thank you very much. Thank you for your initiative in starting IJAN. It's a privilege to co-chair that with you. Um,
We wouldn't,
and I,
we couldn't get very far without your uh, intimate involvement in the system. And I appreciate the way you really go to bat for people in the system and try to make their lives better. That's
well,
something
thank
that,
you. Yeah, I appreciate IJAN a lot, and I appreciate you a lot and the board. You mentioned early on prosecutorial discretion, and one of the things that I've agreed to do that I will just tell you about now and tell the public about also is I've agreed to help to actually write one of the lifers' biographies for him. I've been in touch with him for about 4 years, and it has to do with a case that involves kidnapping. And kidnapping is one of those, like you were talking about, there are different sentences that are pretty broad, and prosecutors can make broad decisions about some of the ways the laws are written because they're vague. They're very vague. And this particular person is charged with that a Class A felony, and a lot of it had to do with statements that he made in a psychotic break during a time that he was on methamphetamine. So, getting his story out and getting other people's stories out and doing things like IJAN does in conferences, I think help to inform the public. And that really is our goal. If somebody wants to get in touch with IJAN, wants to join IJAN, wants to come to the conferences, wants to know more about IJAN, can you talk for just a minute about how they can do that? The webpage, the Facebook, blah, blah, blah.
well, the web page is just um, um, Iowa Justice Action Network.org, and we have a pretty complete web page that talks about all of our activities. Uh, Somebody else will have to comment on Facebook because I'm not a part of Facebook. I know we do have a pretty active uh, Facebook presence and have quite a number of people that follow us. Now, I mean, the best way to get involved on a longer term basis is to uh, send us your email. And I have an email distribution list of over about 300 people, and I'm always eager to add to it. Uh, and and that will keep you informed about our conferences, and also we send out notices when there's important legislation that's being considered. I always promise not to bombard people with emails. I know we all get dozens of emails daily and weekly, and I don't just send out an email to pontificate about something. Uh, I send it out when there's something that is really happening that people need to know about. And so getting on our email distribution list is the best way really to to keep in regular contact with us. But and um, you can you can email me allen.hays@uni.edu. That's the email I use for IJAN stuff, and I can put you on the list, or actually you can do that. We have a button on the website too where you can uh, give a query to to IJAN, and we'll get you on the list that way. So those are the best ways to 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 get involved if you really want to. And also, I gotta mention we are always willing to make presentations to groups. I mean, we are delighted uh, to get such invitations now. Uh, of course, the in-person invitations dropped off considerably during the pandemic, um, but we can do presentations either in person or by Zoom. I spoke to a Lutheran conference attended last week. It was good to reach out to that group, and so we're uh, all you have to do is contact us, and we will. If you have a group that would like to hear more about these issues, and I mean we'll drive anywhere in Iowa. I think the farthest away I drove was Keokuk, but I'll drive. If you want a personal invitation, I can drive anywhere in Iowa to give it, or if you want it on Zoom, we can do that too. So that's another way that you can, and the more we talk to groups that are maybe not as involved directly in advocacy, the more we can recruit people because we do need a broad base. We need people from different communities throughout the state. If everybody's from Black Hawk or Lynn County, that doesn't that's it's good to have people from those areas, but we need people from Story County or Potawatomi County or
Mhm.
Madison County or wherever. We need people from all over the state so that legislators from different parts of the state can hear from our advocates. But so getting as broad a base as possible is really important to us. So
Yeah. Yes. Well, once again, Al, thank you very much for your time
yeah.
and for your wisdom and for your efforts and for all that you do. And I will close with a thank you to all of you who have listened and the hope that you will find this informative and interesting and choose to go to the webpage and look over what the Iowa Justice Action Network has to offer. If you want to get in touch, if you agree with what we're saying, if you disagree with what we're saying, if you have any comments, please make them on the page, on this page, or feel free to contact me at Iowa Prison Perspectives, and it's IA Prison Perspectives at gmail.com. And I really, really want the series of different videos with different people to generate conversation and to get people thinking and get people talking and get people acting. So please, please feel free to make contact or make comments. And I will close for now and I'll see you again soon. So thank you very much for your time and your energy. Bye for now.
Thanks, Sue. I hope these YouTube things can really go out to